My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 72 years old. And I'm going to tell you about the day my own daughter tried to steal my life from under me. Not my money, though she tried that too, but my dignity, my independence, my very right to exist as a human being capable of making my own decisions. You think you know betrayal? You think you understand what it means to have your heart ripped out and stomped on by the person you love most in this world? Let me tell you something, you don't know a damn thing about betrayal until your own flesh and blood forges your signature and tries to convince the world you're nothing more than a confused old fool. I was at First National Bank on a Tuesday morning. October 15th. I remember the date because it's burned into my brain like a brand. I'd gone in to make a simple deposit, my social security check, nothing fancy. The clerk, a young woman named Susan who'd helped me for years, looked at my account on her computer screen and her face went white as paper. "Mr. Bennett," she said, and her voice was shaking. Actually shaking. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold the papers she was shuffling around on her desk. "Sir, I need to speak with you about your account." I thought maybe there was some computer error. Maybe the bank had made a mistake. Hell, maybe someone had tried to scam me. You hear about that happening to old folks all the time. But what she told me next. Jesus Christ, what she told me next nearly knocked me flat on my ass. "Sir, your daughter tried to close your account." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I felt my knees go weak, felt the air rush out of my lungs like I'd been sucker punched. My daughter. My Sarah. The little girl I'd raised with my own 2 hands after her mother died. The child I'd worked myself to the bone for, sacrificed everything for, loved more than my own life. "There must be some mistake," I said, but even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew there wasn't. You know that feeling when the bottom drops out of your world? When reality shifts beneath your feet and suddenly nothing makes sense anymore? That's what I felt sitting in that sterile bank office, listening to this young clerk tell me that my own daughter had tried to steal my life savings. She didn't ask for help. She didn't come to me and say, "Dad, I'm struggling, can you help me out?" She didn't have the decency to look me in the eye and ask for what she wanted. No, she forged my name. She sat down with a pen and deliberately, methodically, copied my signature like I was already dead and buried. If you're watching this, hit like and subscribe, because what happened next, every parent needs to hear. Every parent needs to understand that the child you love, the child you die for, can become a stranger who sees you as nothing more than a bank account with legs. The bank office smelled like paper and disappointment. You know that smell, that sterile, corporate scent of forms and fluorescent lights and dreams being crushed under the weight of bureaucracy. The computers hummed their electronic song, and I could hear the distant chatter of other customers going about their normal business, completely unaware that my world was collapsing in real time. Susan, the clerk, kept clearing her throat and shuffling those damned papers. She was trying to be professional, trying to maintain that careful bank employee composure, but I could see the pity in her eyes. The horror. She'd watched me come in every month for years, watched me make my modest deposits, watched me carefully count out my bills. She knew I wasn't some wealthy man with money to burn. She knew every dollar mattered to me. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "your daughter presented documentation stating that you're no longer capable of managing your financial affairs." The words felt like ice water in my veins. Not capable. My Sarah, my baby girl, had told the world that her father, the man who'd raised her single-handedly for 15 years, was nothing more than a senile old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own money. She had a doctor's letter, Susan continued, and now she couldn't even look me in the eye. It stated that you were suffering from cognitive decline. That you were a danger to yourself financially. A doctor's letter. A fake goddamn doctor's letter declaring me unfit to live my own life. The rage started building then, slow and hot in my chest like a coal catching fire. But underneath the anger was something worse, a pain so deep and cutting that I thought it might split me in half. "I'd like to see those papers," I said, and my voice was steady. Deadly calm. Susan hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the desk. There it was. My daughter's signature on power of attorney documents. Sarah Elizabeth Bennett, written in that neat, careful handwriting I'd helped her practice when she was 7 years old. The same loops and curves I'd guided her little hand through when she was learning to write her name for the first time. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd taught her to write. I'd sat with her at our kitchen table night after night, helping her form those letters, praising her when she got them right. And now, 40 years later, she was using that same handwriting to stab me in the back. I stared at that signature for a long moment, remembering her small hand in mine, remembering the way she'd scrunch up her face in concentration, remembering how proud she'd been when she finally wrote her whole name without help. Sarah Bennett, she'd said that first time, holding up the paper with a huge grin. "Look, Daddy. I did it all by myself. All by myself." Christ, if only I'd known then what those words would come to mean. I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. The hurt was too big for tears, too profound for something as simple as weeping. Instead, I just asked for a pen. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Heavier than it should have, like it was made of lead instead of plastic and ink. But I signed those revocation forms with a steady hand, each letter a small act of defiance, each stroke of the pen a declaration that Harold Bennett was still very much alive and in control of his own damn life. Susan watched me sign, her eyes wide with something that might have been surprise. I think she expected me to break down, to crumble under the weight of what my daughter had tried to do. Maybe she thought I'd beg her to call Sarah, to work something out, to find some middle ground where families could stay intact and dignity could somehow be preserved. But there was no middle ground here. You can't meet betrayal halfway. You can't compromise with someone who sees you as nothing more than an obstacle between them and your money. "There," I said, sliding the papers back across the desk. "That should take care of things." My voice was calm. Controlled. But inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was that 7-year-old girl's father again, remembering every bedtime story I'd read, every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every tear I'd wiped away. 40 years of fatherhood reduced to one forged line on a piece of paper. But I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to roll over and die just because my own daughter had decided I was already dead to her. I signed my name on those forms, really signed it, not some fake bullshit version, and in doing so, I closed more than just her access to my accounts. I closed her future. At least the future she'd planned for herself, the one where Daddy's money would solve all her problems and Daddy himself would conveniently disappear. The clerk, Susan, she looked at me with something like admiration. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I have to say, you're handling this remarkably well. Remarkably well. As if there was some handbook for how to handle having your heart ripped out by your own child. As if there was a proper way to respond when the person you love most in the world tries to steal your life." I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting in that uncomfortable chair for what felt like hours. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," I said. Professional. Polite. Like we'd just completed some routine transaction instead of dismantling my relationship with my daughter. I walked out of that bank into the cold October sunlight, and the silence rang in my ears like a bell. The world kept moving around me, cars driving by, people walking down the sidewalk, life going on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything was different now. My daughter had tried to steal my money. But what she'd really stolen was something far more valuable, the last of my illusions about who she was. But it wasn't always like this. Christ, it wasn't always like this. There was a time when Sarah Bennett was the light of my life, the reason I got up in the morning, the answer to every prayer I'd never thought to pray. I remember when she was 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair, her little hands tangled in my hair as she pointed at everything with wonder. "Look, Daddy. Look at the horses. Look at the cotton candy. Look at the fireworks." Everything was magic to her then. Everything was possible. Her mother, my Margaret, had died when Sarah was only 3. Cancer took her quick and brutal, leaving me with a toddler who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. I didn't know how to be both parents. Hell, I barely knew how to be one parent. But I tried. God knows I tried. I worked double shifts at the plant, sometimes pulling 16-hour days just to keep us afloat. Other fathers were home for dinner and bedtime stories. Other fathers were coaching Little League and helping with homework. I was working myself to death trying to be enough provider, enough parent, enough of everything Margaret would have been if she'd lived. Sarah never complained. Even as a little girl, she seemed to understand that Daddy was doing his best, that the long hours and the tired eyes and the microwave dinners were all part of keeping us together. She'd sit at the kitchen table doing her homework while I paid bills, both of us quiet in our separate tasks but together in that small, warm space we'd created. I taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot behind our apartment building. I was the one who held the back of the seat, running alongside her as she wobbled and weaved and finally, miraculously, found her balance. "I'm doing it, Daddy," she screamed, and the joy in her voice was like music. "I'm really doing it." I remember every birthday party I threw for her, usually just the 2 of us and maybe a neighbor kid or 2. I wasn't good at parties, didn't know how to make the house look festive or how to plan games that little girls would enjoy. But I tried. I bought the cake from the grocery store bakery and hung streamers from the ceiling and wrapped her presents in paper that was usually crooked and taped too many times. She never cared. She'd tear into those presents like they contained the secrets of the universe, squealing with delight over whatever small toy or book I'd managed to afford. Every birthday gift I bought becomes a small regret now, a reminder of how much I loved her and how little it mattered in the end. But there were signs. Even then, there were signs I chose to ignore. By the time she was in high school, something had shifted. The gratitude was gone, replaced by expectation. The wonder was gone, replaced by entitlement. She stopped saying thank you for the things I did for her, stopped acknowledging the sacrifices I made. It was as if she'd decided that my love, my time, my money were simply her due, payment for the inconvenience of being my daughter. "Can I have $20 for the movies?" became, "I need $20 for the movies." "Thank you for driving me to Sarah's house," became silence, the car door slamming as she disappeared into her friend's world without a backward glance. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers are supposed to pull away from their parents, supposed to test boundaries and assert their independence. I told myself she'd grow out of it, that the sweet little girl who used to hold my hand at the bank when she was 5 would come back to me eventually. But she never did. That little girl was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with feelings. She used to hold my hand at the bank when she was 5. She'd stand on her tiptoes to see over the counter, fascinated by the mysterious adult world of deposits and withdrawals. The tellers would give her lollipops and she'd save them for later, wanting to make the sweetness last. Now she was forging my signature at that same bank, trying to take everything I'd worked for without even the courtesy of asking. The irony was bitter as poison. The first time Sarah borrowed money from me, she was 22 and fresh out of college. "Just a small loan," she said. $500 to cover her security deposit on an apartment. She'd pay me back as soon as she got her first paycheck from her new job. I gave her the money without hesitation. Hell, I was proud to give it to her. My daughter, starting her adult life, building her independence. It felt like a rite of passage, a father helping his child take those first important steps into the world. She never paid me back. Oh, she had excuses. The job didn't pay as much as she'd expected. The apartment needed unexpected repairs. Her car broke down. There was always something, always some crisis that meant she couldn't spare the $500 for her old man. And I let it slide. Love makes fools of parents, and I was the biggest fool of all. The next time it was $1,000. Car repairs, she said. Real emergency. She'd definitely pay me back this time, with interest even. She was so sorry to ask, but she didn't know where else to turn. I gave her the money. Then it was $2,000 for dental work. $3,000 to help with her wedding. $5,000 when her husband lost his job. Each time, she promised to pay me back. Each time, I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because she was my daughter and I loved her, and surely love was enough to keep us honest with each other. But the thank yous stopped coming. The apologies became perfunctory, obligatory. She stopped pretending the money was a loan and started treating it like tribute, payment owed to her simply for existing, for gracing me with her presence in my life. I thought I was helping. Christ, I thought I was being a good father. When your child is struggling, you help them. When they're drowning, you throw them a rope. That's what parents do, right? That's what love looks like. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being her father and became her enabler. I stopped being the man who'd taught her right from wrong and became the sucker who'd pay for her mistakes. The safety net became a hammock, and Sarah settled in for a long, comfortable rest at my expense. The moment I realized she'd stopped saying thank you was like a slap across the face. We were sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd helped her with homework all those years ago, and she was asking for another loan. $3,000 this time, for some business opportunity that was sure to pay off big. I handed her the check, and she folded it up and put it in her purse without a word. No thank you. No acknowledgement of what this meant to me, what it cost me. Just the expectation that Daddy would provide, as always. Sarah, I said, you're welcome. She looked at me blankly. For what? For the money. For helping you out. She shrugged. Oh. Right. Thanks, I guess. Thanks, I guess. Like I'd done her some minor favor instead of handing over $3,000 I couldn't really afford to lose. That was the moment I should have said no. That was the moment I should have drawn the line and made her face the consequences of her choices. But I didn't. I was too afraid of losing her, too afraid that saying no would mean saying goodbye. So I kept saying yes. I kept writing the checks and transferring the money and depleting my savings account one crisis at a time. I told myself I was helping, but really I was buying her love. Paying for the privilege of being her father. Love makes fools of parents. And by the time I realized how big a fool I'd been, it was too late. After the bank, I went home and spread everything out on my dining room table. Every checkbook, every bank statement, every receipt and record I could find. 20 years of financial history laid out like evidence in a trial, and I was both the prosecutor and the defendant. The numbers were staggering. $53,000 over the years. $53,000 of my retirement savings, my security, my peace of mind, handed over to my daughter like offerings to an angry God. I went through every canceled check, reading my own handwriting on the memo lines. Car repair. Medical bills. Emergency fund. Apartment deposit. So many emergencies. So many crises that only Daddy's money could solve. Each check was a memory. Each payment was a moment when I'd chosen to believe her, chosen to trust her, chosen to enable her rather than force her to stand on her own 2 feet. Looking at them all spread out like that, I could see the pattern I'd been too blind to recognize before. The amounts got bigger over time. The time between requests got shorter. The gratitude got thinner until it disappeared altogether. I was watching my daughter's transformation from beloved child to financial predator, documented in my own handwriting. There were other things in those files too. Birthday cards she'd sent me, always asking for money in the sweetest possible terms. Dear Daddy, I hope you have a wonderful birthday. By the way, I'm a little short on rent this month. Christmas cards with similar requests. Mother's Day cards, because apparently I was supposed to play both roles, with gentle reminders about her student loans or credit card debt. She'd weaponized every holiday, every special occasion, every moment that should have been about love and family and turned it into another opportunity to shake me down. I found the letter she'd written me when she graduated college. Thank you for everything, Daddy. I know it wasn't easy raising me by yourself, and I want you to know how much I appreciate all the sacrifices you made. I promise I'll make you proud. The letter was signed with the same handwriting she'd later used to forge my signature. The same loops and curves, but twisted now into something ugly and selfish and cruel. I sat there in my dining room until well past midnight, adding up the numbers, calculating the cost of my love. $53,000. More than half my retirement savings. Money I'd saved by working double shifts and skipping vacations and buying generic groceries. Money I'd planned to use for my own old age, for my own emergencies, for my own peace of mind. Gone. All of it gone, funneled into the bottomless pit of my daughter's wants and needs and demands. But it wasn't really about the money. Not entirely. The money was just the weapon she'd used to strip away my dignity, my independence, my right to say no. Every dollar she'd taken was a piece of my autonomy, a fragment of my self-respect. By the time I saw it, really saw it, it was too late to call it love. It was leverage. My love for her had become her leverage over me, and she'd used it like a crowbar to pry open my wallet and my heart. The dining room was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel, the same clock that had marked time through Sarah's childhood, through Margaret's death, through all the moments good and bad that had brought me to this place. I looked at those papers spread across the table and felt something shift inside me. I was done being a victim. I was done being a fool. It was time to take back what was left of my life. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Tom Morrison had been my friend for 30 years, had handled Margaret's estate when she died, had helped me navigate the legal maze of single parenthood and financial planning. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it would be Tom. Harold, he said when I explained the situation, I'm so sorry. But I can't say I'm entirely surprised. That stung. You saw this coming? I saw a pattern, Tom said carefully. Every time you updated your will, every time we discussed your estate planning, it was always about providing for Sarah. Making sure she'd be taken care of when you were gone. You never talked about protecting yourself from her. His office was quiet and dignified, filled with law books and framed diplomas and the accumulated wisdom of decades of practice. I sat across from his desk and watched him scratch notes on a legal pad with an expensive pen, documenting the death of my relationship with my daughter in careful legal terminology. What do you want to do? Tom asked. Everything, I said. I want to revoke her power of attorney completely. I want to change my will. I want to make sure she can't touch a penny of my money while I'm alive or after I'm dead. Tom nodded and kept writing. We can do that. Are you sure this is what you want? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Was I sure? Hell yes, I was sure. I'd been unsure for 20 years, always giving her the benefit of the doubt, always hoping she'd change, always believing that love would be enough to fix what was broken between us. But you can't love someone into being a better person. You can't sacrifice your way into their heart. I'm sure, I said. We spent 3 hours in that office, methodically dismantling every legal connection between my daughter and my assets. Tom explained each document as I signed it, making sure I understood the implications of what I was doing. Your new will, he said, leaves your estate to a trust fund for your granddaughter, with the provision that Sarah cannot access it until Emily turns 25. If Sarah challenges the will, she forfeits any claim to the estate entirely. My granddaughter. Emily. She was only 8 years old, but already I could see she was different from her mother. She said please and thank you. She hugged me when I visited and seemed genuinely happy to see me. Maybe it wasn't too late for her. Maybe she could be saved from becoming what her mother had become. There's also a provision for charitable donations, Tom continued. The local food bank, the literacy program at the library, the scholarship fund at the community college. Sarah's greed will end up helping people who actually need it. The irony was perfect. The money Sarah thought she was entitled to would go to people who were genuinely struggling, people who would be grateful for help instead of treating it as their due. As I signed the last document, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the hollow, desperate pride of a father trying to live vicariously through his disappointing child, but real pride in my own actions, my own choices, my own strength. That day, I told Tom as we shook hands, I didn't lose family. I found backbone. And I meant it. For the first time in 20 years, I'd put my own needs first. I'd protected myself instead of enabling someone else's selfishness. I'd chosen dignity over delusion. It felt like waking up from a long, terrible dream. The phone rang 2 days later. I was having my morning coffee, reading the newspaper, enjoying the strange new peace that comes with finally doing the right thing. When I saw Sarah's name on the caller ID, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and her voice was honey-sweet with false innocence. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Sarah." "Good, good. Listen, I was just at the bank, and there seems to be some kind of confusion about our paperwork. They're saying there's a problem with my access to your account." "Our paperwork?" Like she'd had any right to access my account in the first place. Like forging my signature and lying about my mental state was some kind of joint venture we'd embarked on together. "There's no confusion," I said. "I revoked your power of attorney." Silence on the other end of the line. "Then, what? Why would you do that?" "Daddy, you must be confused. We talked about this, remember? You said it would be easier if I could help you with your banking." The gaslighting was immediate and shameless. She was trying to convince me that I'd agreed to something I'd never even known about, trying to make me doubt my own memory and judgment. "I never agreed to anything," I said. "You forged my signature." "Daddy, that's not. I would never." "You're scaring me. Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson and have him take a look at you." Dr. Peterson. The same fake doctor whose letter she'd used to try to have me declared incompetent. The web of lies was so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that for a moment I almost admired her dedication to the deception. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I know what I signed, and I meant it. But Daddy, I was just trying to help. I was trying to protect you from making mistakes with your money. You're getting older, and sometimes older people. Sometimes older people what? Sometimes they get tired of being lied to and stolen from by their own children." Another silence. Then the mask slipped, and I heard the real Sarah underneath all the fake sweetness. "You can't do this to me," she said, and now her voice was hard and cold and ugly. "I'm your daughter. I'm your only family. You can't just cut me off. Watch me." The phone line went quiet except for the sound of her breathing, sharp and angry. I could picture her face, the expression she'd worn as a teenager when she didn't get her way, petulant and entitled and mean. "I need that money," she said finally. "Mark lost his job again, and we're behind on everything. The house payment, the car payments, Emily's school fees. If you don't help us, we could lose everything." There it was. The truth at last. Not, "I was trying to protect you," or "I was just helping with paperwork." Just raw, honest greed. Just, "I need that money," and the assumption that my needs, my security, my future didn't matter at all. "Then maybe you should get a job," I said. She made a sound like a wounded animal. How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. You stopped being my daughter the day you forged my name. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, listening to the silence ring in my ears. Outside, the world kept turning. Birds sang in the trees, cars drove down the street, life went on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I'd finally said no. I'd finally drawn the line. I'd finally chosen my own dignity over her endless demands. I poured myself another cup of coffee and went back to my newspaper. For the first time in years, I had time to read it cover to cover. No one was asking me for money. No one was manufacturing crises for me to solve. No one was taking pieces of my life and calling it love. The silence was beautiful. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. Small towns are like echo chambers, every whisper gets amplified until it becomes a roar. Within a week, the story of Harold Bennett cutting off his daughter was making the rounds at the grocery store, the church, the diner where I ate breakfast on Sundays. But the story they were telling wasn't the truth. It was Sarah's version, carefully edited to make her the victim and me the villain. Poor Sarah, I heard Mrs. Henderson say at the post office. Harold's losing it, you know. Paranoid. Thinks she's trying to steal from him. She's just trying to help, and he's turned against her completely. It's so sad, Mrs. Chen agreed. Old age can be so cruel. My heart just breaks for that sweet girl. Sweet girl. The same sweet girl who'd forged my signature and tried to steal my life savings. But they didn't know that part. They didn't know about the fake doctor's letter or the lies or the 20 years of financial manipulation. They only knew Sarah's story, the devoted daughter trying to care for her confused, paranoid father. Mark, Sarah's husband, was particularly creative with his version of events. According to him, I was suffering from dementia and becoming dangerous to myself and others. I'd been making wild accusations, he said. Threatening people. Acting erratically. We're really worried about him, I heard him tell the pharmacist. Sarah's been trying to get him help, but he won't listen to reason. It's heartbreaking, really. The whispers followed me everywhere. At the bank, the tellers looked at me with pity. At the grocery store, people stared and murmured. At church, the congregation gave me a wide berth, unsure whether to treat me as a sick old man or a cruel father. But I didn't fight back. I didn't try to defend myself or set the record straight. Instead, I did something that drove them all crazy, I documented everything. Every conversation, every whispered comment, every lie Mark and Sarah spread about me, I wrote it down. Date, time, location, witnesses. I kept a careful record of their campaign to destroy my reputation, their attempt to make me the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Lies are like houses built on sand, they look solid from a distance, but they can't withstand close examination. Sarah and Mark could control the narrative for a while, but they couldn't control it forever. I just had to be patient. I had to let them hang themselves with their own rope. Let them talk, I told myself as I sat in my kitchen, writing in my notebook. I've earned my silence. And I had. After 20 years of trying to explain myself, trying to justify my love, trying to make excuses for Sarah's behavior, I'd finally learned the value of keeping my mouth shut. Words were just ammunition in the wrong hands. The truth was quieter but more powerful. I'd speak when I was ready, on my own terms, in my own time. Until then, let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let them build their house of lies higher and higher, until the weight of their own deception brought it crashing down. I was 72 years old, and I'd finally learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. 3 weeks after I hung up on Sarah, she showed up at my door. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in my garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. I heard the car door slam and looked up to see her walking across my lawn, her face set in that determined expression I remembered from her childhood, the look she got when she decided she was going to get her way no matter what. "Hello, Daddy," she said, stopping at the edge of my garden. I straightened up slowly, my back protesting after an hour of bending over. "Sarah. We need to talk." "Do we?" She crossed her arms and tried to look sympathetic, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. "This has gone on long enough. I know you're angry with me, and I understand why. But we're family. We need to work this out." I pulled off my gardening gloves and looked at her. When had she gotten so hard around the edges? When had the softness left her face and been replaced by this brittle determination? She was 38 years old, and she looked older, worn down by whatever constant stress comes from living beyond your means and expecting other people to fund your lifestyle. "Come inside," I said. "We'll talk." We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd read her bedtime stories when she was little, where we'd watched cartoons on Saturday mornings, where I'd helped her practice her lines for the school play. The memories hung in the air between us like ghosts. "I want to apologize," she said, and for a moment I almost believed her. "I should have talked to you before I set up that power of attorney. I was just worried about you, living alone out here, managing everything by yourself. I thought it would be easier if someone could help you with the paperwork." "Someone forged my signature, Sarah." "It wasn't. I mean, I know how you sign your name. I've seen you do it 1,000 times. I thought you'd be okay with it if it meant less stress for you." Even now, even sitting in my living room trying to make amends, she couldn't tell the truth. She couldn't admit what she'd done or why she'd done it. Every word out of her mouth was another lie, another attempt to manipulate me into believing that black was white and up was down. "What do you want?" I asked. The mask slipped a little. "I want my family back. I want things to go back to the way they were." "The way they were," I repeated. "You mean with you taking my money whenever you needed it and me pretending it was normal?" "It wasn't like that." "What was it like, then?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears that might have been real. "I know I made mistakes," she said. "I know I should have been more grateful for your help over the years. But Daddy, I'm drowning here. Mark can't keep a job, the bills are piling up, and Emily needs things. I can't do this alone." There it was. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what she'd done wrong, but another plea for money. Another crisis that only Daddy could solve. "You're not alone," I said. "You have Mark. You have your in-laws. You have friends. You have your own 2 hands and your own brain. But you're my father." "Yes," I said quietly. "I am. And for 38 years, I've been trying to be the best father I could be. I worked myself to death to provide for you. I sacrificed my own needs to meet yours. I gave you everything I had to give. Then why? Because you didn't just take my money, Sarah. You didn't just forge my name. You forged my trust." The words hung in the air between us like a judgment. She stared at me, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out what combination of words might still work, what story might still get her what she wanted. "I can pay you back," she said finally. "If that's what this is about, I can pay you back everything. It might take time, but this isn't about money." "Then what is it about?" "It's about the fact that you see me as a bank instead of a person. It's about the fact that you've never once asked how I'm doing or what I need or whether your constant demands for money might be hurting me. It's about the fact that you were willing to have me declared incompetent just to get access to my savings account." She was crying now, and maybe the tears were real. Maybe some part of her actually understood what she'd done and felt sorry for it. But it was too late for tears. The damage was done, and it couldn't be undone with apologies or promises or crocodile tears. "I love you," she said. "You're my father and I love you. No, I said, standing up. You love my money. If I were broke, if I had nothing to offer you, would you be here? Would you care if I lived or died? She opened her mouth to protest, but the words didn't come. The silence stretched between us, and in that silence was my answer. I think you should go, I said. She stood up slowly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment and something that might have been grief. You'll regret this, she said. When you're lying in some nursing home with no one to visit you, you'll remember this conversation and you'll regret it. Even at the end, even as she was leaving, she couldn't resist one last attempt to hurt me. One last threat disguised as concern. I walked her to the door and watched her get in her car. She sat there for a moment, maybe hoping I'd change my mind, maybe waiting for me to run after her and take it all back. But I stayed in my doorway, watching, until she finally started the engine and drove away. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, like I was sealing off a chapter of my life. No anger, no sadness, just finality. I was done being her victim. I was done being her bank account. I was done being anything other than Harold Bennett, a man who deserved better than what his own daughter had given him. The house was quiet after she left. Peaceful. For the first time in 20 years, no one was asking me for anything. 2 months later, I did something I hadn't done in years, I spoke up. There was a meeting at the community center about elder financial abuse, organized by the county attorney's office after a rash of similar cases in our area. I almost didn't go. What did I need to learn about financial abuse that I didn't already know firsthand? But something drew me there. Maybe it was the need to hear that I wasn't alone, that other people had been through what I'd been through. Maybe it was curiosity about how many other Harold Bennetts were sitting in their houses, wondering how their children had turned into strangers. The meeting was small, maybe 30 people, mostly older folks like myself. The county attorney, a young woman named Lisa Crawford, talked about the warning signs, the legal remedies, the resources available to victims. It was all good information, but it felt abstract, clinical. These were real people with real stories, and they needed more than legal advice. During the question and answer period, I raised my hand. Yes, sir. Ms. Crawford said. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on me. My name is Harold Bennett, I said. And I want to tell you about the day my daughter tried to steal my life. The room went completely silent. I could feel the tension, the shock, the recognition. These people knew exactly what I was talking about. So I told them. All of it. The fake doctor's letter, the forged signature, the 20 years of financial manipulation that led up to that moment at the bank. I talked about the guilt and the shame and the way love can be weaponized against you by the people who are supposed to love you back. I talked about the isolation, the way financial abuse cuts you off from your community, your friends, your sense of self-worth. I talked about the lies abusers tell, both to their victims and about their victims, and how easy it is to believe them when they come from someone you love. But mostly, I talked about fighting back. About the moment I decided I was worth more than my daughter's opinion of me. About the day I chose my own dignity over her demands. I may be old, I said, looking around the room at all those faces, some crying, some nodding, all understanding, but I'm not done teaching lessons. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, sharing their own stories, thanking me for having the courage to speak the truth out loud. An elderly woman named Rose grabbed my arm with both hands. Thank you, she said, tears streaming down her face. My son, thank you for showing me I'm not alone. A man about my age clapped me on the shoulder. I thought I was the only one, he said. I thought there was something wrong with me for not being able to fix my daughter. One by one, they shared their stories. Children who'd stolen from joint accounts. Grandchildren who'd forged checks. Sons and daughters who'd convinced their parents to sign over property or change wills or hand over life savings. The same story, told 30 different ways. We weren't alone. We weren't crazy. We weren't bad parents or terrible people. We were victims of a particular kind of cruelty, the kind that comes wrapped in love and family obligation and the assumption that blood ties give people the right to bleed you dry. Ms. Crawford asked if I'd be willing to speak at other meetings, to help get the word out about elder financial abuse. People need to hear from someone who's been through it, she said. Someone who's come out the other side. I said yes. For the first time in months, I had a purpose beyond just surviving. I had a way to turn my pain into something useful, my experience into something that might help other people avoid the same trap. Public respect started to restore my dignity. The whispers in town gradually shifted from, "Poor Harold's losing his mind," to, "Harold Bennett is brave for speaking out." People who'd avoided me started nodding hello again. The pharmacist asked how I was doing and seemed to actually care about the answer. The truth, it turned out, was a powerful disinfectant. The more I told my story, the harder it became for Sarah and Mark to maintain their version of events. Facts are stubborn things, and the facts were on my side. I wasn't a confused old man being manipulated by his paranoid delusions. I was a victim who'd found his voice and his strength, and I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. 6 months after I spoke at that first meeting, I received a letter that changed everything. It was from a woman named Patricia Wilson in the next county over. She'd heard about my story from her sister, who'd been at one of my talks. "Dear Mr. Bennett," the letter began, "I want to thank you for giving me the courage to take back my life." Patricia's story was different from mine but painfully familiar. Her son had been slowly draining her retirement account for years, convincing her that he was investing her money in various business ventures that never quite panned out. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd taken nearly everything. "I was too ashamed to tell anyone," she wrote. "I kept thinking it was my fault somehow, that I'd failed as a mother. But hearing you speak made me realize that love isn't supposed to hurt like this. Love isn't supposed to leave you broke and broken." She'd confronted her son, revoked his access to her accounts, and gotten legal help. It wasn't easy. He'd fought her every step of the way, threatened her, tried to have her declared incompetent just like Sarah had tried with me. But she'd stood firm. "Your story saved my life," the letter concluded. "Not just my money, my actual life. I was so depressed, so hopeless, that I'd started thinking maybe everyone would be better off if I just wasn't here anymore. But you showed me that it's possible to fight back, to reclaim your dignity, to choose yourself over their demands." I sat in my kitchen holding that letter, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I cried. Not tears of pain or anger or grief, but tears of something I'd almost forgotten existed: purpose. My suffering hadn't been meaningless. My story wasn't just a cautionary tale, it was a roadmap for other people trapped in the same situation. Every time I spoke up, every time I told the truth about what financial abuse looks like and feels like, someone else found the courage to save themselves. I framed that letter and hung it on my wall, right next to the revoked power of attorney documents. They were both proof of the same thing, that Harold Bennett was still capable of making a difference in the world. The next week, I planted a tree in my backyard. A maple sapling that would outlive me, that would grow tall and strong and provide shade for whoever lived in this house after I was gone. It was a small act, but it felt symbolic. I was planting something beautiful in soil that had been poisoned by betrayal and pain. As I patted the earth around the roots, I thought about legacy. For years, I'd worried about what I'd leave behind for Sarah, what kind of inheritance would set her up for life. But inheritance isn't just money, it's the lessons you teach, the example you set, the difference you make in other people's lives. Sarah would get nothing from me financially. But Patricia Wilson and Rose from the community meeting and dozens of other people I'd spoken to, they'd gotten something much more valuable. They'd gotten hope. They'd gotten permission to value themselves, to set boundaries, to refuse to be victims. That was a legacy worth having. As I sit here now, putting the finishing touches on this story, it's been almost a year since that day at the bank. A year since my daughter tried to steal my life and accidentally gave me a new one. The pain hasn't disappeared completely. I don't think it ever will. There are still moments when I see something that reminds me of the little girl Sarah used to be, and the grief hits me like a physical blow. The death of a relationship is still a death, even when it's necessary, even when it's the right thing to do. But the pain has purpose now. Every time I tell this story, every time I speak to a group of seniors about financial abuse, every time I help someone else recognize the signs and find the strength to fight back, the pain becomes something useful instead of something that just hurts. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. It doesn't mean pretending the abuse didn't happen or that the abuser has changed. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, sometimes looks like protecting yourself from further harm. Sometimes it looks like walking away and meaning it. Sarah has tried to contact me a few times over the past year. Letters mostly, and one Christmas card that I threw away without opening. I heard through the grapevine that she and Mark lost their house, that they're living with his parents now, that she's working at a retail job and complaining bitterly about how unfair life is. I feel sorry for her, in a distant way. Sorry that she never learned to stand on her own 2 feet, sorry that she chose greed over love, sorry that she destroyed her relationship with her father for money she was never going to get anyway. But I don't feel responsible for fixing her problems anymore. That's not my job. It never was. My job now is to live the rest of my life with dignity and purpose. To help other people who are going through what I went through. To be the voice that says, you deserve better than this. You're worth more than what they're offering. You have the right to protect yourself. The truth is a powerful thing. It cuts through lies and manipulation and gaslighting like a knife through tissue paper. It gives you strength when you feel weak, clarity when you feel confused, hope when you feel hopeless. I signed one paper that day at the bank, the revocation of Sarah's power of attorney. But what I really signed was the end of silence. The end of accepting less than I deserved. The end of being a victim. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 72 years old. And I'm not done telling my story yet. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that you're not alone, if it gave you the courage to make a change in your own life, then it served its purpose. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell your own story when you're ready. Break the silence that keeps abuse hidden in the shadows. Because maybe your story needs to be told next. Maybe you're the voice someone else needs to hear. Maybe your courage will save a life, the way Patricia Wilson's letter saved mine. The silence ends here. The truth starts now. And you are worth fighting for.